excited to have you here with us for our Campus Speak webinar series. I'm David Stolman, co-founder and president of Campus Speak, and I'll be serving as our moderator with our two experts here for our webinar for National Collegiate Alcohol Awareness Week. First, we'll introduce our experts, then we'll get right into some conversation. So first with us is Lorin Phillips. She's an educator that's been helping students talk about tough and essential topics. She's been involved with fraternity and sorority life and is an expert in that space and is currently the Associate Executive Director of Enablement for Tri Sigma. Lorin believes in approachability prevention education. Her goal is to help students and communities recognize and confront harmful behaviors with confidence. In her 20-some years in the field, she has she's been seen as firsthand as what is possible when individuals can find their voice and realize that safety and harm reduction is less about rules and more about caring, engaging, and being a part of others' well-being around them. When she's not supporting students in their leadership in communities, you'll find her biking, you'll find her on the water, two different things, and throwing a ball with her dog, Millie, who seems to have an endless amount of energy. Also with us is Bobby Gordon, an award-winning alcohol and other drug educator, researcher, and a prevention expert. In his also 20-plus years of career experience, he has partnered with communities, federal agencies, professional organizations, and local state law enforcement. His work spans organizations like Major League Baseball, Bacchus Network, Association of Fraternity and Sorority Advisors, the U.S. Navy, National Institutes of Health and Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, National Science Foundation, and the U.S. Department of Justice and Education. He proudly serves on the board of the Coalition Higher Education Association for Substance Abuse Prevention and has done so for 15 years. He recently served in key roles in the state targeted response for the national opioid crisis through Arizona State University and the University of California, San Diego. Bobby holds MBA from the University of Arizona, a master's in counseling from Eastern Michigan, and completed his undergrad at Muskegum with a BA in psychology. Also an expert and engaged through his fraternity in fraternity and sorority life through Kappa Sigma. He lives in San Diego and has no free time, but the little free time he's managed to find, he enjoys music, road trips, and volunteering with numerous local nonprofits. We have two amazing people here. And I want to start off like this is a huge topic. It is an ongoing challenge within higher education, and it has been for years. And so I think over time, this challenge and the way that we have approached it has morphed. People's understanding of these topics have morphed. And so when you're thinking about the misconceptions that are out there, I'm going to ask each of you to weigh in. I'll ask Lorin to start. One misconception that you see, if you were able to wave your magic wand, that one misconception being a real conception instead of a misconception, would have a big and positive impact on students and those that serve them.
I think we're still fighting the battle of like everyone drinks, and this is something that everyone's doing. And the reality is, and statistically, that's not the case. And I know for me, I probably fell into that myth and that misperception simply because the people that I was around were consuming alcohol. So I thought everyone else was as well. And I think the more we can help give permission and understand that it's a okay choice and a great choice and a choice we need to support to not drink, and understanding that people are making that choice, the better off we're going to be. I will say, as you've talked about things shifting and morphing, I definitely see that being a much more acceptable choice and something that people are talking about. I mean, you even see it outside of college experiences too, where there's places and clubs that you can go that are non-alcoholic. So I think we're going in the right direction. I think we just need to still dispel that myth that you go to college to party.
Bobby, what do you say? What's that myth?
Well, there's lots of them, and that's key to a lot of what I talk about with college students and also professionals on college and campuses and community campuses, with local police and deans and administrators. I think for me, it's for me, one of the biggest myths is Let's teach college students how to care for a drunk person while they're also drunk. So let's watch their breathing. Let's monitor their heart rate. And I often say that even in my college days, if it was Halloween and I'm in my sexy nurse outfit costume and I have my stethoscope on, I'm 2 or 3 drinks in and I am in no place to be checking anybody's breathing or heart rate. And how dare we as college professionals expect college students to be taking on that care? So if there is an emergency, it's safer to call than to not call police, ambulance, etc. It's safer to just save a life instead of saying we're going to leave somebody on their side and then leave them alone because they're no longer the life of the party. And I think that that is a big myth that, we do all of these interventions and all this education and I used to be one of those people on a college campus that did that, to do that education, but it's just not realistic. It's just not realistic.
And just to follow up, Bobby, when you're talking about that, there's going to be two different conversations. And so if you could frame that conversation best for administrators, staff, someone that's, this is their job, about the unreasonableness of that expectation. But then also, how would you frame that for the consumption of students and
Sure.
student leaders,
Sure.
that especially those student leaders that always seem to want to step forward and take on as much responsibility and care for others? How do you navigate having that message understood by both of those audiences?
Absolutely. Well, the way that I frame it for college administrators and police and the campus folks that are actually on the ground doing the job is that you have to remember that you're not the ones at the party. So you can provide all the education and the prevention, but you've just given them an educational intervention to say the very first thing that goes, even after one drink or one shot or one beer, is your judgment. And now you're asking the students to use their judgment to decide whether someone is safe or not, or okay or not, or breathing or not, or has a heartbeat or not, and may have alcohol poisoning. So it's a complete disconnect in terms of that education. And the other thing I would tell them is, if you don't have an amnesty policy, my best recommendation is to have one. And an amnesty policy means that whether someone is drinking underage or not, the entire goal is to get someone help. And so instead of people being scared to call the police because they might get a minor in possession charge, let's take that off the table so that we're actually rewarding strong, good judgment when someone's in a crisis and they call the police because they need help, because they're not afraid of getting in trouble. That's how I would frame it for the administrators. For a student, I always frame it this way, that one of my mentors in the field, Maureen Sweeney, who has long passed, but she was a mentor in field, and I was one of those smart ass college students that asked, so yeah, how do you know when it's time to call the ambulance? Because you just told me that I'm drunk, so how do I know? And she said, oh, sweetie, listen, it's much easier to explain to your friend's family why you called an ambulance that they didn't need, as opposed to explaining at their funeral why you didn't.
Hmm.
And that's just it. And when you say that to college students and you have that message and you frame it that way, it's much safer to just call if there's an emergency, or even if you think there's an emergency. It's better to have a couple $100 emergency bill and save a life than to be talking at a funeral why you didn't.
Yeah. And it's good to see how many more states have been leading in with legislation about amnesty and medical and drug amnesty,
Yes.
even other types of amnesty, to make sure that it's called. I do see some challenges sometimes that they're very clear, and the first to report gets amnesty, and it's a little I think having good conversations with staff and students about, this isn't, maybe it'd be good for it to be a race to the phone. But the reality is that, it shouldn't scare other people off from doing what's right.
Exactly. I love it when I go to a college campus and one of the first questions that I ask is, do you have an amnesty policy? And if they say yes, it makes my conversation much easier with the students.
Yeah.
If there's not an amnesty policy, it's an uphill battle to convince students that it's okay to call emergency services, because they're afraid that they're going to get in trouble, get expelled, get out of school, get arrested, whatever it might be. And all in lieu of saving a life.
Yeah.
Sure. And I will say too, I mean, I think when those policies were first starting to become kind of like a trend and you were seeing more of those, I found that, and I don't know if you have the same experience, Bobby, so tell me if your perspective is different. But I think there was a lot of like talking amongst the students, and there were, again, some misperceptions around what that actually meant. And I've really seen a lot of like campuses and colleges and universities doing a much better job of educating around the whole picture of what that means. I think, David, to your point, like it's the first person, that calls, or does it mean that there won't be a conversation, that there won't be something that we need to talk about, but it means that you're not going to get in trouble? Because I think even when those first started coming out, people still weren't using them because they'd heard this happened to my friend, and they still had to go in and have a meeting with, the campus accountability office and so on and so forth. And so I think they work when they continue to educate not only about the availability, but all the different components that are part of them. And so I think kudos to those campuses that continue that work of like transparency on that policy.
Yeah.
And Lorin, I want to lean in a little bit because I know you have such great expertise within the organizational world of creating culture within organizations of caring. We talked a little bit about what conversations do we have with students, a little about what conversations we have with staff. A key area of the culture building within fraternities and sororities are the volunteers and the impact that volunteers can have in either creating good or not so good cultures that are really focused on safety and concern and caring without being so, rules based. And that's one of the
Right.
strengths that I know when you're talking with groups about talking about care and concern and that culture without a focus on really the rules don't matter as much as our care and concern and engagement in each other. So I'd love for you to speak a little bit about that and how you specifically engage, different aspects and especially the volunteers that we haven't talked about yet within those organizations.
Yeah, for sure. I think that for new volunteers, new folks that are maybe recent graduates coming into that experience, I think it's really important to talk about one, how do you build relationships without necessarily talking about that social piece? It surprises me like how amazing, incredible, talented, professional, individuals will go right back into kind of that college speak and college language. So I think one, helping them understand how to have those conversations and still be able to identify and relate, but not actually be in it with them. I think the second piece is helping them understand how to talk about some of those protective pieces. Like, Bobby, I agree with you 100%. You can't talk about how, these are all the things, your judgment, and then put sole responsibility on the students to intervene. I definitely am all for bystander intervention training and talking about that. But I think that we can talk about those protective behaviors and what does it look like to intervene before somebody needs help. And I think that's where I try to focus permission for advisors, for even national volunteers to lean in a little bit to that, to say, how do we create that culture of care and saying, let's not wait until someone's a problem. Let's not wait until we have to ask them to leave the event. We already know that there's a problem. What can you recommend before that? And how can we help them recognize those signs? But then also having that conversation around, all right, what other information are you putting out there to say, how do you self-monitor? Let's not put our friends and our peers in a situation to have to intervene with us. How can I understand how alcohol affects my body, make good choices so I'm not that person at an event and I'm not that problem? So helping advisors kind of give that permission to have those conversations and it's not criticism, or to continue to ask student leaders, like, what's the level of comfort that you have in talking to one another? When we were coming out of COVID and people were in their pockets and didn't really know each other in those larger groups, the number one thing that they said was like, I'm scared to confront someone in this because I don't really know them. Like, I'm still kind of, I mean, I know their name, I've seen them on Zoom, I've seen them on like a video camera, but I've not actually interacted with them before. I think we're coming out of that, but that was certainly like a big barrier to the safety piece. There's still something that's happening though. I will tell you, in the last 18 months, more than I can recall, in the last 18 years, I have heard more people just sort of being left alone. Whether that was they just sort of disappeared from a social event, just left on the waiting for a bus to come pick them up or their Uber. And I'm really looking into that. I don't know if that's a trend that other people are seeing, but that feels new to me, that someone is being left behind. That just seemed like a very basic component, even from like going back to when you went to the amusement park with like your elementary school class or something. Like, you did a head count, you made every shot, made sure everybody left together. So I'm not quite sure where that is, but that's something that we're starting to have conversations with our volunteers, and that to just prepare them to say it's okay to ask about this for the social events. Like, don't just ask about the paperwork and the checklists and the bus. Let's talk about how we're going to take care of one another, and what's your plan when somebody needs help. Like, are you prepared to help the students do that?
And if I
And I know I was just going to pull in that I know you've worked, that you've created award-winning programming for Tri-City Strides, and this is probably why, because it's a more holistic view where you're empowering people's communication skills. You're empowering a framework of looking out for each other and that accountability. And I think in some of, again, the fraternity and sorority world, some of these mega chapters, that feeling of I am distant from that person who wears my letters, are they really my responsibility? I'm betting that those frameworks you're providing and the skill sets are helping people to sort of get over that fear, because it's just one less set of fears for me to, sort of jump past to get to be someone of help.
Mm. Indeed. I mean, and I think that some of those products and some of those programs and initiatives really grew though out of, like, I feel really fortunate that I'm part of an organization that values data and is not scared to collect it on high risk behaviors. I think sometimes you can be guarded, like, oh, what's this going to tell us? And it's been really interesting to ask some questions around things like intervention and say, all right, if it was these conditions at 9 o'clock, at 10 o'clock, when would you be most likely to intervene? And initially, in some of our work, it was showing us that students weren't intervening until it was like midnight, and the person's clearly stumbling and falling around and like visibly, intoxicated. So it allowed us to have some conversations to say, how can we intervene earlier? Like, why wouldn't we intervene here when you just saw them pound 3 shots and they'd already been at the party for like a couple of hours? It would prevent them from getting here and then being angry or being a little bit more difficult to deal with. So I think a lot of those programs and a lot of those initiatives were because we had the data. We also were able to, I mean, I'm a big fan of social norming campaigns. And I think we always ask the question around, one, would you want somebody to intervene? Yes or no? And then two, how likely do you think and how much do you trust that someone else in your chapter would intervene? And it's been really refreshing to see that those have been about the same level. So we can say like 90% of your chapter would want you to intervene if there was something going on. And 85% of them think that somebody would. So there's a trust. Or when there's a difference between that, when 90% say, yes, I want you to intervene, and only 50% think that they would, how do we have conversations around that? So I think that data has helped us kind of narrow in where are the problematic behaviors that we need to focus on and how can we help them take steps toward better. And strides is really our accountability process, but it goes in and it asks them the simple question around why. How did we get here? And helps understand the great things, the bright spots that they're doing. What can we learn from that, and how can we build upon that for some change? Instead of just saying, no, here are the rules. You can't do this. You can't do this. You need to correct this. We just were finding that every time we said, do a program, do a presentation, make this agreement or contract, they were still fighting us to say, but we're great people. Like, we're doing great things. Look at all the service that we're doing. Look at the money that we're raising. And so both things can be true. And that's really what the center of strides is, to say, you are doing great things. And we had some problems at this social event. How can we fix that? How did we get here? And a lot of times it goes back to the things that we were just talking about, the relationships, the capability to address conflict, the ability to recognize when someone is entering a phase of problematic behavior in the night of consumption. And then we can give them the tools and we practice how we actually do that. It's not just, here's what you need to do. We get in there and it's an in-person practical application experience. And so if there are the tools and accessibility to do that, I just feel like that we're not arguing, we're not going back and forth and having the debate around rules. We're having a conversation around care and what it means to be a support system for one another. And that's not something that you can argue with. You can argue a policy.
Such a meta level. You're teaching early intervention through early intervention with an organization. It's meta. And Bobby,
it's
I want
impressive.
and I want to lean in, Bobby, because you, beyond anybody else I've heard, can help people individually understand sort of this polysubstance interaction in a way, because we're talking about, how do we intervene earlier and how does a student know to intervene earlier? That's a huge factor in this. And
Yes.
I know that you're so good at explaining this in I don't want to make it sound simplistic, but ways that are accessible to someone without a lot of information walking into your sessions.
Absolutely. So let me dovetail first to commend Lorin and the work that Tri Sigma are doing. The philosophy and the intent is refreshing to hear, and it's proactive and it's early and it's holistic, and I love that. I think something that I love to do with volunteers, especially fraternity sorority alumni volunteers, is to take them through what are the latest trends so that they can see what's going on, because the landscape has changed since they went to college, even if they graduated 5 years ago. So that's something that is worth noting. Polysubstance use, I think a lot of it is not intentional. I don't think anyone is intentionally drinking and taking Zoloft for anti-anxiety on purpose. I think that they're prescribed Zoloft and they're taking it every day and they're working with a doctor, and then they decide to go out on a night of drinking and they have no idea what the interaction will be or can be, and it's a different interaction for each person. And so, a lot of people think about polysubstance use. Okay, so somebody's using cocaine and then he used ketamine to come down. That's not what we're talking about here. That's like intentional polysubstance use. So this whole myth around prescription drugs, and prescription drugs are safe because I got it from my doctor, or I got it from my roommate who got it from his grandmother because she no longer needs the painkiller. Uh, you know, it's a pill. It came from whatever pharmacy, and we're good. And I can have a couple beers, and I'm really good, and I'm fine, and I know how I'll do. And you don't know how you do, because there's lots of different factors and a synergistic effect that happen in that. And that's probably the highest level that I can explain it without going into details. That we are a medicated society. It's not a medicated generation. There are people who take drugs to wake up. That's called caffeine. There are people who take drugs to go to sleep. There are people who take drugs during the day to help them focus. Anti-anxiety, anti-depression, anti-whatever it might be, right? And all of those things affect our mood and our brain chemistry. And then you add in alcohol or drugs or a substance into that, and now you've doubled the layer. And 2 times 2 doesn't always equal 4. Then it might equal 8. It might equal 16. It might equal 1600, and you just don't know. There's no way to predict it. So that's probably the best high 30,000-foot view I can give you on that polysubstance use. And so that's why I talk about that during my program, about prescription drugs specifically, and students who are using drugs not as prescribed, but also using them as prescribed, plus drinking or doing other drugs. Let's make some better informed decisions. You know, so that's where I come at it from.
It's
And
interesting that you bring that up. I feel like a group that we haven't quite talked about that could be part of the solution in some way, I think, are the parents and the guardians and the support systems for students in some of this too. I don't know that they're necessarily, students are going to be talking to their parents about their social laws, right? So I think that peer-to-peer education is going to have a greater impact on that. But I do think that parents can be such a powerful place in, I think, the resources that are maybe available on campus, like in understanding, like counseling centers, and they have some cool spaces right now to help relieve anxiety. Because hey, I work hard, play hard, or I'm stressed out, I'm going to go out, and then all that does is mean that you have less sleep, and then it means that you're just maybe going to want to drink more, or perhaps more of those substances to help you relax. So it's a vicious cycle. But I think parents could be a really interesting resource, not only in helping them understand the campus resources that are available that they could take advantage of, but I think talking to them about how can you help the students that maybe are on prescription medicine and using those in the prescribed ways. Think about 2 things. One is your first year experience the time to come off of those, and or when you're going to school and you're thinking about how to help continue the regiment and the structure that's helpful, how can the university resources and support systems connect you to folks locally so that you can kind of continue that care? And I think parents can help with that. Like, what are the interactions? What are the possibilities to prompt that conversation that may not be, in the top of mind for an 18, 19-year-old student. And then I also wonder, I have no data on this at all, so this is just my wonder if point. So disclaimer there. To what degree I think are parents truly having the conversation if there is some sort of family history or genetic history with alcoholism or addiction, just because of the likelihood, it's not a guarantee that that will impact that person, but it certainly creates a higher likelihood or a possibility of that. So our parents having that conversation before their students go to school, especially if they've never been exposed to alcohol, understanding that family history. So can they be involved in, should you get off these medications now? Is this the right time? Maybe we should figure out a plan to stay on and work with the university to help you do that. And then here's your family history. And do you understand that you could be at a greater risk?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that we have to remember, and I talk about this in my program, is that the brain is still developing, whether you're a high school student or a college student. And so your brain chemistry is constantly changing, and even adults often take months or years to find the right combination of drugs for whatever their ailment might be. And so if I use as an example, a student who's taking Vyvanse or Ritalin at a certain level in high school for ADHD or ADD, and then they get to college, perhaps their brain chemistry is starting to change as they age, but the baseline is kind of off base because now you've intermixed other alcohol or drugs, and so it's
Mhm.
hard to measure what that baseline is and what the exact dose should be for your ADHD or ADD medication. So that's a conversation to intentionally have, and hopefully doctors are able to have those conversations in safe spaces. But I don't know that they're having those conversations.
Bobby, one area I want to lean into, we haven't talked about this population much, and I know there are so many unique threads to pull and ways to support them in terms of the conversation and ways to support student athletes. And I know you've worked with MLB and you've worked with the NCAA. What are the specific or nuanced ways that we need to approach this conversation when it comes to athletes and those that serve them? I mean,
Yeah.
there have to be areas from your experience that we don't know that you've been able to see that we should talk about.
Well, the first thing that I like to clarify myths with is that any type of protein supplement, any type of even electrolyte supplement, unless it's, alkaline water, is going to be a mood enhancing substance. It
Mm.
just is by nature, just by nature, even just creatine. And so for students who are thinking that, well, I'm not doing steroids, but I am taking other supplements to help enhance my abilities on the field. They have to realize that can be a mood enhancing substance, and it can alter the brain chemistry, and that can either be temporary or permanent. The second thing is that there's a big myth that when I'm off season, I'm good to go and I can party till dawn. But when I'm in season, if it's a big win on a Friday and then I have a bye week next week, I can party then. Yay, that's great. And I've got a week to recover. And so what you're doing is you're actually affecting your in-season ability. And something that I will tell administrators that I find most frustrating when I go speak to a campus and I'm working with college athletes is if a team is in season, they're not required to come to the educational session because they're in season. So if I go to a campus in the fall, it's unlikely that I'm going to be speaking to the football team. If I go to a campus in the spring, it's unlikely that the basketball team will be there. But it is baffling to me, and I have worked on college campuses most of my life. I get that they are stressed and that they have lots of extra things, but just because they're in season doesn't mean that they're not using substances. And then the other thing is that even working with NCAA and professional sports, it is very clear to me, and it's of course anecdotal, but the patterns that you develop in college are the patterns that you tend to develop as an adult. And so, in working especially with Major League Baseball players, even at the AAA level, but the major leagues, many of them have lamented that they started out in college, then they got drafted, and they've just continued the patterns that they started in college, and nobody ever thought about it, nobody ever talked to them about it. But I know that at some point somebody did, but they just weren't listening, or it wasn't an effective presentation, or it just didn't hit them at the time because they just didn't think it related to them. And so I think we have to target student athletes a little bit differently. We have to respect the fact that they are experts in their field, and their field is on the field. And so giving them that gratitude that they are savvy student population, They know their nutritional supplements by heart. They know exactly what it takes to cut weight, gain weight, whatever it might be. Let's then add in that conversation about alcohol and drugs, and it's not just an off-season conversation.
And I think a blind spot for those that are still focusing on athletes are their rec sports, their the non-scholarship teams are sometimes cast aside, and club sports where there is this in between. They're focused enough on athletics as if they were a D1 NIL paid scholarship athlete, but yet they're not, and they don't have the support structures. They're often not thought of when it comes to campus programming. They're not brought like any other student organization to a lot of these, and they just live in that gray area where they have the same issues and they're not supported.
I liken that, and I'm glad that you brought that up. It's the same for me as a former college student advisor, that I used to work in fraternity sorority life, but then you have organizations that are the engineering fraternity, don't want to pick on them, or you have the band, and they still have hazing problems, but nobody's talking to them about it because it's just the fraternities and sororities that are single gender. And so we've got to have that broader conversation. And I think that that's a really good analogy. Yeah.
As we're drawing toward the close of our time, I want us to start to focus on you're now given a small tool bag. We're leaving Lowe's, and the person helping every new contractor is saying, here are the tools that you need to bring with you, because it's kind of the duct tape. We already give the duct tape, but beyond duct tape, what are the couple? It's either a framework that they should leave thinking about. It's either a specific tool, a resource base. I know many of them are very policy focused, like we have schools that are looking at NARCAM and they're looking at that as a solution when that's only a tool. Like, so what are the things that, whether it's the students or the administrators that are with us right now, what are the things that in that mini tool bag they should focus on and make sure that they bring back home with them? So, Lorin, I'll start with you and then we'll bounce back around to Bobby.
Okay. I think for maybe administrators, professionals, I think a lot of people probably know about this resource. I hope they do. If not, I think just thinking about like what are the things that are effective out there and the low cost. It is collegedrinkingprevention.gov has a great, they've already done the research. They've already done the work for us. This is beautiful chart. It says like, here's how much money this costs. And then like, here are your star levels of what's effective, and thinking about where the research lives in that. For me, that's a good way of like, if you're not sure how to assess like what efforts, or maybe even you just need some ideas, or what are some new things that we can bring to the table, how can we think about that? So I think that's a very base level good place to start. The second thing I would think about for whether it's advisors or whether it's also, those campus professionals, would be just the simple formula of behaviors a function of people and environment, right? If we want to change the people or behaviors, what are the people factors and what are the environmental factors? If you don't have a great social event when you go to location A, why don't we not go to location A? What opportunities are there to understand where the issues are happening as well? We just started to collect some information on our discipline components around where were you? Was this a person's personal party? Was it a fraternity house? Was it a bar? To understand where those problems are happening so we can start to combat some of the environmental pieces. So don't just keep educating on alcohol 101, like yes, still do those things, but realize where the difference is. And then I think for students and student leaders, the power of tracking and being intentional can really open your eyes. And so I would challenge, just go Google something simple like BAC calculator. Don't use it as a drinking game. I've heard that. And I'm like, come on, like it's a great tool. But even just like something like calculator.net or something, I think it's typically the first thing that pulls up. Like Indiana has like a great a website tool. But for people just to take a second to put in there, all right, this is about how long I drink in a typical evening if I choose to drink. And this is what I'm drinking during that period of time, just for it to push out like your BAC. And if you don't know what blood alcohol concentration is or the different effects on your body as your BAC goes up, Google that too. Every time I do an in-person workshop and I have students actually say, think about what you did last time you drank and how long you're drinking and what that looks like. Just put that in here. You can hear like the rumbles, like, like what's going on? It is so clear that they had no idea how high their BAC was going, even just with the 3 shots they took as a pregame before they went out. And I think that just awareness and that knowledge can even help them make some different choices. It's not a magic solution, but it's a starting point.
I like that, providing realistic tools and reframing that conversation for what alcohol poisoning actually is, because everyone's heard the term alcohol poisoning. Everybody's been through an alcohol drug presentation, right? But if you can reframe what alcohol poisoning actually really is and how someone can actually get there, and then they see that, that's part of that motivational interviewing, part of that basics counseling intervention that a lot of college campuses have done and have received funding to do, is really inherent there. For me, it's about really harm reduction and having realistic conversations and not being afraid to say the real things. For me, it is alerting students to latest trends and administrators to latest trends, and understanding that if you're seeing a bunch of people at a party walking around with allergy Flonase nose sprays, and they're doing that all night, it's not because it's allergy season. It's because they've decided to mix cocaine or ketamine in there and mix it with water, and they found on Google what the exact formula was to do it. And not everyone is suffering from allergies. So let's have a real conversation. And that is not the norm. And I appreciate that Lorin brought that up. We have to realize that normative behavior is really the perception is everybody is drinking at this level. The reported drinking is really at this level. And when you put that out there and you say, by the way, did you know that most people are only having 4 or fewer drinks when they party? You actually, then the perception goes down, but then the actual reported level goes down. What people are afraid of, unfortunately, when it comes to athletics or fraternities and sororities, for example, is the drinking level may tend to be higher. And so campuses are afraid to then even do that normative campaign because maybe someone is having 5 or 6 or fewer drinks when they party. But again, let's be realistic and let's have that conversation. And if we can reduce a drinking level, let's reduce a drinking level. Instead of steering away from it. Let's provide Narcan as a tool instead of saying, well, that makes us legally responsible, and so we can't do it because the university president or our college lawyers said we can't do it. You know what I tell student organizations to do? Then go to a local treatment center, go to a resource center, and go get some Narcan and have it on hand. Because again, it's all about saving lives. It's all about saving lives. It's not about liability here. Again, what's worse for liability? We save a life or we lose one. So,
Yep.
Well, both of you, thank you so much. You've really helped to frame some conversations, to help people understand a few things, to walk away with some food for thought. I want to make sure that people know this isn't just through a webinar. They can actually bring you to work with their communities. You know, I think drugs, fentanyl, alcohol, and oh my, it's a fun and it's engaging. It's a real topic, a real conversation. And that's the way Bobby addresses it. The informed decisions isn't just his keynote, that you can access that as well as an online course that Bobby's able to help in many ways. And in terms of Lorin's program, I love the title, "The Life Doesn't Come with a Designated Driver." And this is really talking about our responsibilities. And I think on another side that we touched on, that your ability to work with communities about hazing prevention in such an accessible way, and especially women in that very specialized conversation, is truly one of your zones of genius, Lorin. As I said, thank you all for coming to our webinar. We do have a series, and you can find the other webinars that we'll be hosting on a variety of topics through campusspeak.com. That is one word, one S, campusspeak.com /web series. And you can find it on our website. We're pretty easy to find. But other than that, we're so glad you were here, and that you now are empowered to make the students that you work with better because of the information that we're able to share. So thank you all for being here.
thank you.
Thank you.